Good afternoon. My name is Russ Jones. I'm a state representative from Arizona. My district starts at the U.S.-Mexico border down at San Luis and runs all the way up to Parker along the Colorado River. It's about 100 miles by 100 miles, so I guess what's that make that, 10,000 square miles, something along that lines. Population about 250,000. About 70% of that population are Hispanic. And so we have a very diverse community there, and it's a very old community. I likened myself, my family has lived on and thrived on the border for over 100 years. I'm involved in a family business. I'm the fourth generation. We have the fifth generation working in that business as a custom house broker and international freight forwarder when we're not in the legislature. In Arizona, we have a part-time legislature. We don't meet all year round. We do get together every year and try to wreak as much havoc on the general population as we possibly can do in 100 days. And believe it or not, we managed to hear between 1,300 and 1,500 bills in 100 days, so you can imagine all the trouble we can cause. But coming from the border as I do, and as a customs broker and international freight forwarder, I have operations both in California as well as Arizona, and so I'm very familiar with the ports of entry and the border. I've been over almost 35 years a member of the Arizona-Mexico Commission. 25 of those years I've been on the board of directors. Most of it as vice president. I've been on the board of directors for the Border Trade Alliance since shortly after its inception, which is a little over 20 years ago. So I've worked with many of my colleagues in other states on border issues. The discussion this afternoon, we have a very distinguished panel. I'll give you short bios, I think that's in the materials, so I won't go into that in too much depth so we can save more time for discussion. And on the 21st century border regional master plans and for the area, and it should be, I guess, by saying border, it should be really international because it just doesn't work unless it is international. I like to call the border area where we live the frontera zona, and which I guess makes me a frontera sonense, as many of you are. So it's something we all have in common. It's a wonderful culture, a binational culture that has taken hundreds of years to create, and unfortunately, because of the tragedies of the September 11th, it's only taken us about 10 years to almost destroy it. And if we keep going the way we have been without having appropriate planning to deal with these issues, it will go away as we've known and loved it, and our families have. I'm going to I want to use real quickly as an example. I think of both a success and it's not finished yet, so I can't really call it a success. And it's been mentioned here several times about the San Luis Port of Entry, San Luis 2 as we call it, euphemistically there in our area. It's really one single port of entry that before it was reconstructed, all the cars and trucks shared the same queue. And so these 2 and 3 and 4 hour waits with trucks and thermos running and automobiles running, safety issues, collisions, managing that traffic queue was very, very difficult. So the plan was, well, we're going to have to separate them. So we'll build an annex for the commercial. And it was an amazing process of international planning and cooperation. We didn't have a road. There was nothing out in this area 5 or 6 miles out to the east but just bare land and desert. The land didn't even belong to the state. We had to create an entity with intergovernment agreements and create a new thing called Border Regional Port Authority. It's a land port authority, so it could acquire the land from Congress and then in turn provide the land to the federal authorities and the state authorities for the facilities free of charge. We had to put together a cooperative effort on a metropolitan planning organization to share with the state at a local and regional basis and build an $80 million new highway to connect that port of entry with the interstate. And go through the other things like the presidential permit and coordinate with the Mexican side. And it really was truly an amazing process of coordination and discussion from both sides of the border. The unfortunate aspect of this, and why I can't call it a true success yet, is that it is the reality of the border, a multi-year process. And to have that continuity of focus at all levels of government and the private sector, to transcend many years to do the financing and the construction of this size of a project with all the infrastructure that goes with it, is quite an undertaking. And unfortunately, in our area, in that San Luis port of entry, we got everything done except the original port of entry is just like it used to be. The same number of lanes and the same wait times for the automobiles. And to date, we've probably invested between the state, local governments, and the federal government in excess of $200 million. And we're just this close. They even appropriated the money to do all the design and engineering for the reconstruction of San Luis 1. But to date, we don't have a funding mechanism to do the Mexican side or the U.S. side and finish, get to the goal line, so to speak, on this great, great project, which is a model for what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go, now the format for today, I'm going to give each of our speakers, I'll give you a short introduction. They have 10 minutes. We're going to hold our questions till afterwards. I have my helper down here with his watch. He'll give little hand signals. So if our speakers don't see him, I'm just going to sit right here and I'll kind of yank on their coat or something, and so we can get through this, because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions after we hear from them. Our first speaker, in order that we have on the agenda, is Mr. Stuart Little. He's a U.S.-Mexico Border Affairs Coordinator for the U.S. State Department, a career Foreign Service officer. I was speaking with him. I know very well one of his predecessors, Mr. David Randolph, and because of that, I understand that, we talk about herding cats. That's what this guy does for a living, and he does it on a binational basis. So I have a great deal of respect for Mr. Tuttle. Mr. Tuttle, you want to come up here, or would you like to do it down there?
Yeah, I'll come up. That's fine.
Okay.
Rush, you mind if I close this? Is that a problem? Or?
Well, if we close it, does it turn everything off?
Not that I necessarily need the Mexico Institute background for my presentation, but
let's try this. Let's try this. Will it transfer? Will it go down here?
Let's see if we can just do it like this.
There you go.
yeah, that's
Is it your pen?
that's fine. No, but it's a nice pen. I'll
Sure
take
you
it.
want it? I know that you guys are trying to cut corners wherever you can, so I hear you.
Very useful. All right. Well, anyway, first of all, thank you, Russ, and thanks to the Wilson Center for providing this opportunity to talk about these U.S.-Mexico border infrastructure issues, and particularly for the opportunity to participate in this panel about border master plans. Now, I guess before I even start here, let me just ask a question. I want a totally honest answer. Who here could actually tell me what a border master plan is? Roger, you can put your hand up back there. I'm going to give you a shout out later anyway, because I know you can. All right, this is good, because this is where we need to start. Let's ask the question, and let me just kind of provide a framework for what we're talking about. So as we get into all of the presentations, you'll have a sense of what we're talking about. I think the first reality we all need to accept, and one of the driving reasons behind the emphasis on border master planning that is now coming from the very top, from the level of the National Security Council, is the fact that we obviously have extremely limited resources to dedicate to almost any issue in government, but that especially includes border infrastructure. I mean, that's unfortunate, but it's a reality, and it's one we need to accept and figure out how to deal with it in the most efficient way possible. Accordingly, one of the action plan items on the action plan that was produced by the Bilateral Executive Steering Committee, founded by, or directed to be founded by our presidents almost a year ago, is the creation and support of border master plans across the length of the U.S.-Mexico border. The border master plans, and really here I need to give a shout out, and I see that the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration is going to be here giving our concluding remarks. That's very appropriate, because really border master plans, as we conceive them, as we're moving them forward, them forward are and were a brainchild of some very dedicated and exemplary servants at the Federal Highway Administration and their counterparts in Mexico's Secretariat of Communications and Transport. They had been meeting for quite some time in their own fora to discuss transportation issues and how they can better coordinate transportation on either side of the border. And I think that ultimately they realized, you know what, there needs to be some planning mechanism to be able to say what is it that we're going to do over the long term. And the first of these efforts, what we call master plans, was developed in California between the state of California and the state of Baja California. And what it did, and it really was a remarkable achievement in the sense that it was the first time this had been tried. And it took a lot of effort bringing together essentially all of the relevant stakeholders who had an interest in border infrastructure. We're talking federal officials from all of the relevant agencies who were focused on that region of both of our countries, relevant state officials, local officials, NGOs, business organizations, anyone who really had an interest and a stake in the development of this type of border infrastructure. And over several years, they developed some criteria on which they could judge the merits of border infrastructure projects, and using those criteria, which had been carefully vetted and really given a close examination to find out how relevant they were, using those criteria, they developed a prioritized list of projects for their particular sector of the border. Now, I think anyone could probably step in and say, well, I disagree with this, that, or the other. I think the main point is that they were actually able to do this. They developed criteria through this process of consensus and dialogue among all these parties who were very much interested in these issues and came up with a list. Right now, they're revisiting this master plan and updating it. But it really, when we saw that at the federal government level, recognizing the constraints that we're operating under, we very much said, wow, this is a great idea, because one of the biggest challenges we have in the federal government, with obviously very limited resources, is deciding, well, what projects out there are the ones that merit financing and when? I mean, how can you prioritize these things? And truth be told, as a government as a whole, we really haven't had a prioritized list for the border. Particular agencies have had prioritized lists for what they want to do, but as a whole of government approach, we really haven't had that. And that is what the Obama administration is really making an outstanding effort to achieve. Part of the effort is through these master plans. So the idea is you don't just have a Baja California and U.S. California master plan, but rather you have master plans for each significant sector along the U.S.-Mexico border. As it's now envisioned, what you would have is a master plan for Baja and California. You'd have a master plan for Arizona and Sonora. And you would essentially have three master plans for the very long stretch of border between Texas and various Mexican states. A master plan that would cover East Texas centered on El Paso, another master plan that covers the Laredo region, and another master plan that covers the southern Rio Grande Valley. And now where New Mexico fits in there is an interesting question, and that's obviously something that we'll need to look at. But the overall vision is essentially 5 master plans. California and Baja, as I said, are undergoing a revision. Laredo, the Laredo sector, is currently undergoing its master plan as we speak, where there are groups engaged in deciding what the criteria they're going to use are, and then using those criteria, various projects along that border will be ranked. And the idea ultimately, of course, is that you have 5 different master plans, which we're hoping can be completed, all of them, by the end of 2012 or 2013 at the latest. You would have all of these master plans, and at the federal government level, we would be able to look at them and say, okay, California, Baja California has these 8 projects listed. This is project number 1 all the way down through 8. And you can look and see what are the most important projects for each of these regions and direct resources as appropriate to those projects that have the highest priority. That's not going to solve every problem, of course, and there's always going to be other projects that arise for various reasons. But fundamentally, it gives us a way that we really don't currently have to determine where the resources should be directed. And this, I can tell you, I mean, one of the great advantages of this is that these ideas, this prioritization, will largely come from the bottom up. I think, I mean, especially for those that live far from Washington, there's always a concern that, well, how are these issues that are so important to us in our region being decided in Washington, D.C., or being decided in Mexico City, when we here in the region have a very good idea of what's needed? I think we, in our position, are acknowledging that, yes, those who say that definitely have a point. We here from Washington don't have all the answers. We're not in a position to make judgments on our own about which project is the best and which isn't. We need a lot of help from those who are most invested, those who have the most on-the-ground knowledge. That's what master plans can give us. It's not perfect, but and we recognize that there are always biases among those who are providing their input. But of course, when you bring all of those parties together who have interests, those biases should balance each other out, and you should come up with a product that is quite realistic and does reflect the overall consensus of what is best for the region as a whole. Because we in the federal government, our ultimate responsibility is to decide what is in the national interest. That's where we need to direct our funds. And I can give you scenarios from my own particular position where, because we in the State Department issue presidential permits, which are essentially federal government authorization to initiate a project. It doesn't mean it's going to get done. Project sponsors still need to get the money to do it, and a presidential permit doesn't provide funding, but it provides authorization. Well, we will have groups come to us, essentially lobbying for presidential permits, and one group will come to us and they'll explain all about their particular project, why it's so wonderful, why it's so good, and oh, by the way, why it's better than that other project that maybe I've heard about. Literally, the next day, we'll have another group come in from the other project saying, yeah, this is our project, this is why it's really great, and this is why this other project isn't any good. And you know what? I can't tell who's right based on those presentations because both of them are great. And both of them are very convincing about what they have to say, and they're also very convincing about why the other party isn't very good. I and my office should not be in the position of deciding the merits of these cases based on that kind of information. Right? We need to get the best information from the people who are best informed, and that's what master plans allow us to do. As I said, it is not a panacea. It doesn't solve any problem. But it is a huge advance on the way that we have been doing things so far. And hence, that is why it's something that from the very highest levels of government looking at border issues, it is a process that we are encouraging. Those of you who are from the border region, who have an interest in these issues, I would very much encourage you to look at the border master planning processes that are going on in your region. If there isn't one yet, ask about it. Ask when it's going to start up, and find out how it operates, who participates. Of course, not everyone off the street can come in and get a vote, but I think everyone is very interested in making sure that those groups that have the most interest and the most expertise on these issues do have a say and do have an opportunity to make themselves heard and have some influence over what happens in these master plans and how ultimately the projects come out. What I don't want to do is stand up and give all kinds of gruesome details about this, but I'm certainly very open to taking questions as we move through about how the process would work, how it's worked so far, and I might even take it upon myself to point out particular people in the audience who may know a little bit more than me about these specifics, and allow them to answer those questions as well. But with that placed in your minds, I would ask you to listen very closely to all of my colleagues here as they talk about these issues as well, with that context there for you to keep in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Our next presenter is Ralph Scalise. Ralph currently serves as a primary contact for GSA's Land Ports of Entry program. This covers all of the crossings of both the U.S. and Mexico and Canadian borders. He coordinates the federal land port of entry projects at all levels of government. And are you ready? Oh, there he is. Okay, good. Same rules.
Do we have the
You need them. Okay, great. Oh, Stuart forgot his pen.
It was yours anyway, Russ.
Oh,
I
okay.
think.
Thank you. Just, this is down. Well, thank you, Representative Jones, and good afternoon, everybody, and I appreciate the opportunity to present some border infrastructure updates on the southwest border. There's much to talk about. The photo that you're looking at is the most recently completed land port of entry at Donna that was completed in the fall of 2010. It is one of 4 facilities that have been completed since 2009, and hopefully a trend that will start many more completions as the years move on. But there's the issue of funding, and that's one of the topics we're going to be talking about today, I'm certain. With respect to the land port of entry funding in 2011, it all depends on how the budget shakes out. But as it shapes up, in all likelihood, what will end up in our capital program at GSA is little, if none, in terms of dollar infrastructure. It was a rough year. We kind of knew this going on. For the last 2 years, that 2011 might be the big year that we have zero to show for funding, and it may very well be the case. However, the outlook gets better, and as we move into 2012, the funding is far more encouraging. In fact, we have $370 million in the President's budget slated for land ports of entry, including construction funding for Columbus and Laredo, as well as site and design funding for Brownsville. Our hope is that this trend will continue into 2013, but nonetheless, it is very encouraging and should be emphasized given the fact that the past funding levels for our land port of entry program, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, have been about $150 million per year. So, since my last update at the BLC in the fall of 2009, I'm pleased to report the following progress. There are the 4 recently completed projects. We have 2 projects that are in construction, 4 more that are in pre-construction, 5 others that are in design, and 5 more that are in pre-design, so you can see the pipeline building. And the recently completed projects, in addition to Donna, Rio Bravo, which you saw on the slide, we have McAllen, Anzalduas, San Luis, Arizona, Del Rio, Texas. Ongoing construction continues in Nogales, Arizona, and the first important phase at San Ysidro of a very large project that we know has certainly been the topic of discussion over the last several years. A little bit about pre-construction. The project that you see on the first and foremost is Tornillo Guadalupe. That represents a full port replacement. The 3 following projects at Los Tomates, Santa Teresa, and Anzalduas, although relatively small in dollars, I want to emphasize the fact that they are very good examples of utilizing unexpended Recovery Act funds. A very important thing to reuse funds that are not expended and to improve these projects, these existing crossings. These remaining funds will certainly improve the drainage conditions that existed in Anzalduas that we discovered after the project was completed and there was severe flooding. It will expand the administration building at Santa Teresa, which will allow for the addition of a primary pedestrian lane inspection area, and the funds will finally replace the commercial trucking lanes at Los Tomates. We have other projects that are in design as well, with the exception of Columbus, which is also in the President's 2012 budget. These projects in design are still in need of construction funding, and I'm sure as will be the topic of a lot of discussion in this panel. The remainder of the pipeline represents projects that are in feasibility and still require funding authorization, with the exception of Laredo 1, which we were surprised to find and pleasantly surprised to find was in the President's 2012 budget. A final thought from GSA's perspective. The border program remains ever challenging for a variety of reasons. A variety of these reasons we will discuss today. But I want to assure you, and I could speak on behalf of our Commissioner, Robert Peck, that GSA remains committed in our effort to help this program succeed. It's going to be a long road ahead, but we hope to make some serious progress in the upcoming years. Thank you very much.
Probably we'll do this from here because the computer is there. So. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Our next presenter is Mr. Enrique Escorza. He heads up the Political and Border Affairs section for the Embassy of Mexico here in Washington, D.C., and was formerly the coordinator of the Mexico-United States Intersecretarial Group. Well, that's a long word. Bridges and International Crossings, essentially Mr. Tuttle's counterpart for Bridges and Borders. And Mr. Escorza, you choose to do it from there? Okay, you're fine.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here today. I think that the presence of some of the border legislators here in this room today certainly is important for us, because for us it basically opens a very important door in order to start a dialogue that we very much need to build the border as a region of prosperity that we all want. Certainly, as some of the previous speakers have mentioned before, there has been a lot of progress and there has been a lot of positive news concerning some changes in the border that basically allow a better coordination, a better communication between authorities. That is fair to say, definitely, but I think that one of the elements that we are really lacking in the border agenda is the ability of both governments at the different levels to speak freely, constructively in terms of planning. Binational planning was a word that basically was off limits not long ago. And you would be very much surprised for this statement, but certainly the results are there for you to see. The fact that the border was basically clogged for 10 years without being able to develop new ports of entry basically tells you the inability that we show at different levels. And there's no one to blame here, but essentially there was no capacity, institutional capacity among our governments, or probably internally, or probably our laws, or probably our procedures, but certainly the end result was not positive. And obviously the drought that we live in the construction of new ports of entry is a clear signal of that. So it's quite logical, the reaction of both presidents, the moment that they decide to commit this situation and take this bull by the horns and decide to launch a new initiative, a new idea, a very aggressive idea to start thinking together in a vision for the border. Many things have been said about the importance of building a border with a common vision. We have worked extensively in trying to explain for so many months what are the benefits of the Declaration for the 21st Century Border Management. Commissioner Bersin spoke extensively about that. And certainly, my dear friend Stuart Tuttle referred some of the aspects of the action plan that also is a very important component in this new proposal that both governments have for border communities, to understand that there's, yes, a clear commitment on both governments to really commit in terms of working together to achieve a better region for all. But still, I think that there are some things that are important to consider and that we have to address. For the first time, as some of the previous speakers mentioned, the notion of master plans is incorporated for the first time in a high-profile binational document. Try to find out, dig into those documents, and you won't be able to find a reference of a binational commitment to sit together to develop these ideas. That was worked out essentially within a committee, a very important one, the Joint Working Committee, that basically launched this idea, and we have to give all the credit to these institutions, to Federal Highway Administration and SCT, Secretaría de Comunicaciones y Transportes in Mexico, for developing this idea. It emerged basically as a planning tool, yes, as something that would enable authorities in both sides of the countries to identify needs. But the process to really develop a binational master plan is not there yet. That's a very ambitious goal, and you have to be clear on that. It's an excellent idea and is the right approach to start working on regional master plans. But the holy grail, so to say, if the World Cup for all this, would be to develop a binational planning tool. I cannot resist the temptation to refer to some of the problems that I already see that unless we have the ability to engage many actors in this, we will suffer some years to come. And that is that we don't want these master plans, these regional master plans, to become an inventory of projects, and that would be a major mistake on our side. If we believe that this effort is basically to say, okay, I want this bridge and I want this project and I think that this is feasible and I think that this is something that we can achieve together, guess what? We're going to reproduce exactly the same mistakes that we did in the past. Why? Because we have to recognize clearly that in this equation in the border, we have the most important engine of all, which is the local actors, the local stakeholders. And believe me, in my position those years ago when I used to work as coordinator for border affairs from the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it was painful, believe me, painful, to see that in each and every one of the communities that we visited, all of them, they wanted a bridge. And all of them, they referred that their project was the project. That was the one to endorse. That was the one that we have to build. That was the one that we have to commit. And that was something that we couldn't, obviously, we couldn't do something concrete in order to say no. Because we don't see that the corridors, the trade corridors are flowing this way, or we don't see major highway being developed in this area. They all wanted a bridge. And that's certainly something that we have to be aware in this process that we are beginning to build in the border when it comes to regional master planning. They should not be, they must not be an inventory of projects. They should be ideas, goals, visions for the border. And if communities share those goals and those ideas, they will recognize that, well, we cannot go there. We cannot compete there. We cannot present a proposal, certainly because it's not going to be well suited for the region according to the regional plans that we have. So, obviously, what I think that is important, and that's the reason why this border plan matters, is because they will create those conditions to begin a constructive dialogue in the border. Okay? So, every time I talk to people nowadays, after these new tools have been drafted in the binational agenda, I have to be very clear. Say, have you talked to your congressman, your congresswoman, to your local authorities, to your state officials, to your governor? What do they think about that? Are they committed to the project? Has that been properly presented to the federal authorities? Yes or no? What the community said about this? In terms of land, in terms of visions for the urban development, and some reserved areas that you already mentioned here. And sometimes, or most of the time, or the frequent answer that I receive is, no, we have not talked about that, but this is an excellent project. And it may be. It's true, it may be. But the problem is that if we are not able to engage into that dialogue, these regional master plannings are not going to serve to any purpose whatsoever in this world. So probably this is something, a little bit different to what you have heard so far, but I think that this is the responsible way. We have, for the first time, an opportunity to address the idea of planning in a very positive way. But again, the temptation to play the local factor, it's there, it's big, and it's going to be very difficult to resist. On the other hand, due to the fact that the idea of binational planning has not been necessarily the most frequent of the experiences that we have in the border, certainly we need to create some conditions in order to make this idea prosper. And I do believe that we have a fairly good ground to work with. The mere existence of a regional plan already in Baja California region that is there, it could serve to certain purposes as an example. But again, we cannot fall into the temptation to say this is the idea of a master plan and this is basically the template for a master plan. Okay? Because obviously this idea of one size fits all could be tempting, but certainly is going to be tremendously ineffective due to the nature of of the border due to the differences in the process and the institutions that must participate in these processes. So certainly we have to be very constructive, very open, to recognize that, yes, we are working on a fertile ground, but certainly we need to add the local component. And again, I don't really see how these ideas may prosper in the absence of a huge and intense and committed participation from the local stakeholders. Basically, to conclude my remarks here, I have to say that if we are basically trying to safeguard these processes in the future, we have to be very much aware that they should be dynamic, as the border is. They should be open to all the different opinions. Master plans, essentially the regional master plans, should avoid this idea of having, you know, this idea of turning into a inventory of good intentions and good wills, but essentially they should be the avenue through which every single actor should walk through. And it's important that, because otherwise, for me, I do believe that they're going to be dead on arrival. If we are not able to do that, if we are not able to really, really engage all the actors and convince people, it's not necessarily what bridge is going to go first or not. This is the vision that we have for the region. And it's not that this is the first or the second or the last. This is the idea of the sequencing, as it has been referred here. So sequences is going to be essential in this process. Also, to make them work, they should not imply a gigantic cost. In the border, when it comes to developing projects, we have to face the burden of gigantic cost. Gigantic cost for environmental assessments, gigantic cost for, you know, all sort of studies that are required in this process to convince people. And that we have to lower down a little bit if we want to have an effective tool to work with. And essentially, let me finish these remarks by saying that if in the selling world, you know, as Jerónimo Gutiérrez was saying, that we have to sell something eventually, and if we have to sell something, and the basic principle for salesmen and women in this world is a location, location, location. At least in terms of border coordination, I would say, and with these remarks I conclude, is commitment, commitment, commitment. Thank you very much.
Enrique, that was very refreshing, very candid. I appreciate it. Our final presenter is Jackie Mitchell-Edwards. She's Chief Operating Officer of the El Paso del Norte Group, a regional binational public-private economic development group or corporation that is focused on binational quality of life as well as a component of that. And are you ready? Would you like to remain seated, or are you kind of up here? Are you using the computer? Okay.
It's a PDF.
So you know David Randall too?
Yes.
I see him all the time for lunch.
Well, I mean, I would just click here. It looks like that.
Great guy.
He's a fantastic guy. Yeah, I don't know where it went.
That's okay, I can sit down and do it.
Okay.
Would you like to sit?
No, I'll go right there.
Can you do it from here?
Was it a
It's
was
on
it
the-
a
What?
was it a PDF?
It was a PDF.
Oh, here's the PDF.
That was the first page, but I didn't see anything else.
Is it, if you download it, if that's on, everything on this?
Yeah. Let me see.
I mean, I don't have to have it, it's actually
Are you sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sometimes it's with my thinking.
Oops.
been saved from seeing another PowerPoint. Let me tell you a little bit about the Paso del Norte group. It is very different than all that you've heard about today. We're actually a not-for-profit membership group that's comprised of business and civic leaders in our region, the Paso del Norte region, which is El Paso, Texas, Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Ciudad Juarez. Our group and our mission is fairly simple. It's to promote the economic, social, and cultural vitality of the region by cooperative effort, by social interaction, and the free exchange of ideas and views. We don't run anything. We don't own anything. We don't pass legislation. We don't fund any projects. But we are a membership group of concerned business and civic leaders that encourage conversation to reach consensus on ideas. So when we began discussing the 21st century model border ports and that idea for El Paso, our vision of model border ports was to be able to facilitate, because again, we're a neutral ground, facilitate discussions of the various stakeholders in the region. So why, let me just say that, as was mentioned before, every region is different. The actors in each region are different, and we are an organization that's in our region. And so this is just our window on how our community, in particular the business community, is trying to reach consensus. We're a binational group, so over time we've built trust and bridges between business people, civic leaders. We have always been actively focused on community stakeholders, and we already have committees that addressed many issues that are involved in planning, but we are not the master regional planner. But I think that an organization like ours will be a very important part in the process. For model border ports, we formed a model border port committee. Again, we are just the administrative facilitator for this. And on that committee, we have the MPO, the Master Planning, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and EMIP, its counterpart in Juarez. There on the committee is Department of Homeland Security, CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, customs brokers, aduanas, the city, the county, transportation, Congressman Reyes's office, Border Trade Alliance, Foreign Trade Alliance, and many cross-border community business and economic development leaders. So when we have meetings, we convene people from different areas. They come out of their silos and talk about how to reach consensus, and in our case, on the issue of model border ports. And why is that important to us? Well, trade and businesses at the ports of entry are critical, obviously, in our region, and as is security. No security in our region, and in the ports of entry, no business. So our region really affects not only the economic vitality of the border, but beyond, as many, many states depend on the $50 billion worth of goods that transit through the 6 ports in our region, 5 in Texas and 1 in New Mexico. So we are concerned both about security, but mostly concerned about what's critical to us, which is the efficient transit of legitimate goods and services and people, so that we can have commerce while still having effective security. So why is this very important to us in the Paso del Norte region? Well, we've got the 6 international ports. We've got over 700,000 commercial vehicle crossings a year, 15 million passenger vehicles, millions, 7 or 8 million pedestrian crossings, and $50 billion of goods. And so it's critical to improve not only the infrastructure of the ports of entry, but also the efficiency. So we're a place where stakeholders can work together to develop a consensus. And when Commissioner Burson visited our area, he said, well, get together and come up with a consensus plan. And so that's what the committee did. Stakeholders got together, put together more than 25 initiatives, many of which did not require funding, but were ideas from the ground up as to how to improve operations of the ports. They were prioritized by this committee, and again, risk segmentation is key so that if you can segment known transit and known goods and known travelers from those that are less known, we can hopefully improve transit through the ports. So the goal really was to improve the process to create the ability to get more out of the limited resources that we all have. And from the Model Border Ports Committee's position, they wanted customer service, to streamline the secure crossings, to look at ways to use technology, and you heard briefly about the demonstration project in our region, and to look at infrastructure as well. So the Model Border Ports Committee is not part of the official border master plans process, but I'm sure it will be an integral part in the community buy-in as that process continues. So the committee will continue to focus to work on priorities at the ports of entry by having regular meetings and speaking often with Ben Rohrbach, who's in Commissioner Burson's office, that is working with us on this list that has been prioritized of things that we want to happen at our ports of entry. We are helping to facilitate the demonstration project where trucks are loaded at the maquilas and they're sealed and monitored, and hopefully this demonstration project can demonstrate how you might be able to segment traffic based on risks, such as Commissioner Burson mentioned, so that known goods and known travelers can be expedited. I think that the Model Border Ports Committee will continue to provide input and participation into the regional planning process in our area, whether it's the MPO or whether it's the Ports of Entry Operations Plan, which is being worked on currently by the city and TxDOT, and will probably evolve into the master plan. So we will continue to provide input and help develop consensus and recommendations from the ground up, focusing on the benefits to users, which we haven't talked a lot about today, but all about the benefits to the users, operational efficiencies, which we have talked about, and infrastructure needs. We believe also in continuing to strengthen public-private partnerships, and in this sense, what I'm talking about is the public sector connecting with the private sector and making sure that discussions and ideas are hashed out not only from the point of view of where is the funding coming from or what processes have to be created at CBP to handle different processes, but also are they serving the needs of the end users. So this is just a little look at, in our region, how have we organized a ground-up process to inform the master planning process. At our last meeting, which was last week, the head of the MPO, the city, and TxDOT, and the folks working on the operational plan all emphasized how important it was to continue with the Model Border Ports Committee, because it is the way that there is actually activity moving to a conclusion, because there is prioritization happening, there are exchange of ideas, and so rather than going to 12 players, the 12 players can get together and talk and come up with a plan. So that's a little picture of how in our region we are hoping to contribute to the master planning process. Thank you.
Okay, now we get to the fun part. We have young ladies on either side of the room with a microphone. If you'd raise your hand to be recognized, and please, when you stand up, let us know who you are and to whom you wish to direct your question to. And I see the first hand. It's a familiar hand. I've seen it before. It's right down.
Bueno, es realmente mi comentario para los funcionarios de Administración de Servicios Generales, y coincidiendo un poco con lo que dice la abogada Mitchell. Primero decirles que en Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, tenemos muy fuerte el diálogo de la necesidad urgente del puente 45, que allá se le denomina así, 4 para Nuevo Laredo, 5 para Laredo, Texas. Me extrañó no verlo ahí ni como anteproyecto. Es un tema que en la región se está discutiendo mucho. Y respecto a lo que dice el señor Stewart, yo le comento que tal vez el gobierno deba abrirse más a la participación privada, a los usuarios. En lo particular, aparte de ser diputada, soy agente aduanal y como usuario del puerto le comento que estamos concluyendo que en los próximos años el puente actual 3 del comercio exterior quedará totalmente saturado. Cuando este puente se generó hace 10 años, poquito más de 10 años, nunca se pensó los niveles que iba a tener de flujo de camiones. Actualmente tiene más de 8,000 cruce de carga todos los días. Entonces estamos proyectando los usuarios que la capacidad de infraestructura será totalmente rebasada en los próximos 10 años. Y un poquito tocando el punto del señor Enrique Escorza, pues coincido con él que como usuarios vemos que es muy lento el proceso de un puente y que aquí sí valdría la pena que escucharan precisamente la experiencia de quienes participamos dentro del comercio o dentro de las actividades, cualquiera que sea, de la frontera. Y pongo como caso ahí pudiera ser otro, que en el caso de Nuevo Laredo necesitamos empezar ya, y que si no hubiera fondos, como nos dice que son muy escasos los fondos, yo creo que pueden realizarse corridas financieras y abrir un poco la mente a la inversión privada, porque son proyectos totalmente autofinanciables. El caso, cuando se presentó el caso del Puente 3, se presentó bajo ese proyecto por la construcción de particulares y con el peaje se demostró que era un proyecto donde no era necesaria la inversión de fondos públicos. Entonces, si los fondos públicos son tan escasos, como usted dice, para desarrollar estos proyectos y la necesidad de la región lo demanda, porque así lo dicen, los panelistas que les antecedieron a ustedes, nos dieron la importancia del intercambio, más de $1,000 millones en el flujo comercial. Si esto no le da esa relevancia, bueno, pues entonces vamos a acercarnos con la iniciativa privada y que sea la iniciativa privada la que invierta, porque es un negocio y es un negocio rentable. Y pues yo lo único que pediría, ¿verdad?, que como usuario, ¿verdad?, que me gustaría que esto fuera menos lento, que fuera un poco más acelerado, porque sentimos que se nos agota el tiempo y que estamos poniendo parchecitos en el puente. Sí es cierto, ya se ampliaron los carriles, sí es cierto, estamos metiendo rayos X para darle fluidez, pero no estamos viendo a futuro, y ya nos pronosticaron los panelistas anteriores que hay una proyección a doblar la cantidad, que eso nos dice pues que debemos darnos un poquito de prisa. Gracias.
Thank you. Enrique, do you want to start? And Andrew, I guess if you want to chime in, it sounds like it was more directed to you two.
Sí, desde luego. Muy brevemente, el tema de la velocidad con la cual estos procesos se tienen que llevar a cabo debe ser parte también de una visión colectiva de la frontera. Yo creo que en la medida en que no hemos sido capaces de consolidar esa visión conjunta, las susceptibilidades crecen, las posiciones de dependencia se agudizan y es una consecuencia lógica. Si no hay convicción, pues difícilmente hay agilidad. Yo creo que las condiciones están dadas para hacer un movimiento mucho más agresivo hacia la consecución de proyectos que se puedan consolidar en más corto plazo. I'm going to refer very quickly to what I just said. I'm trying to explain that as long as we don't have these communality ambitions in terms of border, we are going to experience the same old positions from different agencies trying to defend what they believe that is right for them, but not necessarily for the region. But as long as we develop a common vision, obviously we believe that things are going to change because obviously that would be the engine to improve things and to move them forward quicker. We're still yet to see a project of a new generation. The three ones that we have developed over the last year, Rio Bravo, San Luis, and Salduas, believe me, Mr. Linsky present here, and I will work on those back so many centuries ago, and finally they come to fruition, yes, but we have yet to see those of the new generation, those that are presented within this new framework and with more efficient processes, so they don't delay that much. That's at least what I could say.
Thank you, Enrique. I'm sorry. I think, Stuart, I think I called you something else, not.
I mean, I could.
And then I looked right
Andrew
at you.
Seeley,
And you're
somebody
going.
very with August.
You had kind of a funny
resume.
look in your face when I said that. So,
It's okay.
So go for it.
No, let me just add that I know that, for example, in the case of the ongoing Laredo master plan, that representatives of the Proyecto 45 have been there at each of these meetings. So, I think there is a very clear desire by those who are running that master plan, and by extension, I think anyone who's running any master plan, to make sure that those developers of significant projects or significant ideas for projects have an opportunity to vet those ideas, to present those projects and those ideas to the community of interested parties, federal, state, and local, to have really a full hearing. And if these are worthy projects, and I think you'd mentioned, perhaps in another context, that a project that has full private financing should be favored in an era where there are limited budgets. I would agree. I'm quite sure that the availability of funding for a given project will be one of the significant criteria in ranking any particular project, such that a project that does have firm financial backing will come out higher on a given priority list in a master plan than another similar project that doesn't have funding. So I think we're making an effort to take those considerations into account, and of course we're always looking for ways to improve that. And I think it's important to remember that the master plans, and this is something maybe we haven't emphasized enough, the master plans are bilateral in every sense. There are representatives of both governments at every level in the private sector from both countries. That is the only way that these plans can prosper, is by having full buy-in, not only from every level of government and from local communities, businesses, and NGOs, but from both sides of the border, such that what we agree on together.
Thank you. That kind of gets me back to a question I wanted to ask real quick, and it's a good segue into it because of the Commissioner's comments about the emphasis on public-private partnerships and how we're going to finance in the future. And I wanted to posit the question that, in these, recognizing that no two regions are the same, and that also goes to their abilities to provide the financing, or they have the tax base, or however, or the business, enough of a robust business sector to do it on a private basis, and recognizing, even though there's an infrastructure cost to developing a project, there's also the soft costs that the government has to spend in terms of personnel that is ongoing, that actually over years exceeds the infrastructure costs that have to go in. And how are you going to weigh these projects? Does it mean that the area that has the most money that can build the building is going to get the project? Or is it, how are you going to assess needs of the United States and the Mexican government and our international and the rest of the countries, not just those immediate borders areas, but what does this do in a cost-benefit analysis for the entire country strategically as well as tactically, and given that these are multi-year commitments to financing and carrying these projects out?
No, that's a great question. First, let me just address the issue of long-term costs for any given project. And this is, I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense that just because a particular project has the money to be built doesn't necessarily mean that it is the best project at the time or that the most cost-effective project long-term. Ongoing costs are an element that is taken into account in our discussions. I mean, particularly the ongoing costs, for example, Customs or Border Protection, which has responsibility for staffing these facilities. If, in fact, Customs or Border Protection does not have the personnel to staff a particular facility, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to invest anybody's money, whether it's public or private money, in it until we can have a better sense of when it can be staffed and up and running. I mean, the worst thing we could do would be to invest a whole lot of money, public or private, in a facility that is not run optimally or anywhere near optimally because there are not sufficient personnel resources to staff it. So, I mean, what it means is it shows how tricky all of these equations really are. It isn't simply a matter of do you have the money now, it's do you have the resources moving forward. And that isn't that easy either, because you can't really project, well, what are you going to have in 10 years? Who knows, really, right? I mean, come on, we can't project that clearly when it comes to a lot of these issues. But what you can decide is, well, is this particular project one that's going to add to the efficiency in that region of the border such that it is worth staffing 10 years from now? Because if you make the decision that it's worth staffing 10 years from now, then it will have the staffing and not some other project that is not as significant to the national interest over the long term. And that's how you need to think of it.
So would you say that Mexico has a little bit of an advantage because they have the NAD Bank that is now in a position to do that type of commitment for long-term financing, and we don't really have a mechanism on the U.S. other than GSA?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily frame it in those terms, because the NAD Bank, of course, is in a position that, I mean, the NAD Bank is also capable of providing funding on the U.S. side of the border as well. If you're talking about a border infrastructure project, I mean, granted, NAD Bank can fund projects deeper into Mexico than it can into the U.S., but on the border, it can fund either one. Okay. That said, I think that we shouldn't look at NAD Bank, at least yet, as a sort of panacea for these issues, because it has a lot of work yet to be done, especially in generating the capital it would need to become that level of player in border infrastructure such that it could make or break large projects.
Ralph, did you have any comments?
No, it's pretty well said. I mean, our funding situation, as I kind of alluded to in my presentation, is on pins and needles, and it's so evident by fiscal year 2011 projected values. But if we could ever get back to the funding level where we get $350 to $400 million a year for projects, I think that's a good thing. But I think having another source of funding is something that's certainly a good thing.
Something for maybe the border legislators and border governors to talk about some more.
Yeah.
Okay, other hands. Eric, who was first? Ladies, tell me who had his hand, who had their hand up. Somebody decide.
Sergio de la Peña from L3 Communications. I keep hearing the story about money over and over again. And I was just wondering if you could give us an idea of who are some of the private companies that have been involved in providing funding. Digging into my Mexican roots, there's a saying that goes something like this: con el dinero baila el perro. And I'm just wondering who's making the dog dance.
Good question. Anyone?
Well, Frank, I don't have a list here, but even if I did, I don't know if I would share it until these things were a little more advanced. And granted, this is the idea of the private-public partnership in border infrastructure is really a fairly new one. If the idea isn't new, the actual implementation of it is fairly new. You have had sort of for-profit projects in the past, but for the most part, these have been municipalities, counties in Texas, on the U.S. side, which charge tolls for being able to cross the bridge, and this is an important source of revenue. For private projects, and I have a number in mind, but it is sort of a fairly new idea because the assumption for a long time has been, look, border infrastructure, this is what the government does. And you use tax dollars for that, and then when you get it, you can take advantage of it. And if you want more, you go to the government, you say, look, we need this. And that's a legitimate way to look at things. Clearly, infrastructure is a government responsibility, but at the same time, if there are private entities that can reap profit from particular projects and you're in an era of very reduced budgets, then that makes a lot of sense, and we're moving in that direction. But I would be hesitant to want to lay out for people here what those projects are, in part because you don't know which of them are going to come to fruition, and you don't want to get people's hopes up or change the direction of negotiations.
Actually, I'll respond also. I think Mexico's been quite a bit ahead of the United States and dealing with limited resources for the border. The Zona Fiscal is a concession for Nogales, Mexico. The Mexican facilities in San Luis, Rio Colorado are a concession. The funding or financing was done through NADBank, but it is a concession that has a long-term contract. I think it's 30 years or something like this. And then of course in Texas you have both public and private bridges. I know a troll from Texas. His name is Sam Bale. Some of these you might know Sam, but again, this is not something that hasn't been done before. In San Luis, actually, initially, we were thinking about making the entire project private, and we were working with investors. We'd actually been talking with investors from the U.S.-Canadian border, where there are other private bridges that go into Canada, and about how we might structure such a deal to do the entire project in San Luis. But in those days, actually, we got pushback from both CBP, Customs, and as well as GSA, because that was kind of a novel way to, they were used to bridges, but this was a whole port of entry with all of the regulatory responsibilities that were involved. And so there was definite resistance from the U.S. federal government to privatize that entire project. And so now we have kind of a hybrid project. Mexico went right ahead from the get-go to make it private, and then we backed off and made it public, but now we're kind of out of public money. So we're in a little bit of a quandary. How do we finish the project when it's partially, a good portion of it's already public funds? I don't know how you convert a publicly funded project into a semi-private one after the fact. So that's kind of a dilemma we're facing over there. Eric.
Right. Hi. I wanted to circle back to Mr. Escorza's comments about the regional master plan process needing to be one of ideas, goals, visions. I think that is a very different idea of the regional master plans from what I understand. I understood them to be prioritized lists of projects. So I'm hearing two different things here from the governments of Mexico and the United States. And I'm also wondering why. So I think what you're saying, Mr. Escorza, is some of these regions don't need a bridge. They need a whole economic development concept hashed out at the community level, which is an interesting idea. I'm also wondering why none of this is linked to the National Exports Initiative, which is owned by the U.S. Department of Commerce. which is the idea that we need to double our exports within the next 5 years or so. And that would imply lots of southbound traffic going through these ports of entry, I believe. So I see a broader vision for these master plans from Mr. Escorza. It might link up with what Stuart's talking about, but and then again, it might not. So where are we on this?
Well, Eric, let me preface that. You recall the Commissioner's comments about taking a holistic approach. So I would gather from those comments that there is a change in how we're looking at these things. So I'll let both Enrique answer that as well as Stuart.
Well, certainly for me, and the way I've been understanding this process among different Mexican agencies, a plan obviously is, in the beginning, a collection of ideas, of course. Where do you want to go? But once you have an idea and you have a vision, you have to commit to that vision. And that is the transcendental change that we have to incorporate into our way to work and the way to develop these sort of ideas in the border. In the experience that we have gathered for so many years trying to establish mechanisms for effective border coordination, we see that our border fellows are extremely creative. There's, something that is deeply rooted in the border is the ability to create, to produce. It's people innovative. It's people with very forward-looking ideas. And having said that, obviously, when you see the proliferation of things and projects and visions, you remember when Jerónimo Gutiérrez was mentioning here the Chalán, that always the Chalán is a milestone in terms of referring to incredible things in the border. The mere existence of a Chalán there, and then the request for communities to say, we want a bridge that is made of stone and not necessarily of ropes pulling from one side of the border to the other, leads you to believe that, yes, there could be ideas, there could be needs, there could be some sort of practicalities that you have to address on a daily basis. Yes, but then have a plan, is having the framework to engage people constructively towards achieving a goal. And then when the priorities may come to place, of course. But if the priorities are basically responding to concrete needs, that is not a plan. Because if those were not thought extensively and assessed and reviewed, and then they lead to the commitment of different agencies, basically is the way that governments should react and respond to infrastructure needs in the border, and that's what we have been doing in recent years. The idea of regional master plans is not planning, it's master planning. It's an idea, certainly, that is going to put us closer to an objective of development that is exactly the core and the final, stop that we want to do in this process. So I think that, yes, they may sound different, but they're not. Essentially, what we have to do is, again, and that's the reason why, for me, commitment is everything when it comes to border planning. Because, again, having descriptions of things that we can do, that's not planning. That's an inventory. And saying, this is what we need to do, that leads us to an effective planning and an effective collaboration among agencies.
Stuart?
Yeah, it's just funny. We in our comments, we may have fallen into a couple of stereotypes and hence confirmed those stereotypes in terms of maybe perhaps Enrique spoke in perhaps more of a visionary tone than I did, and I was a little more pragmatic. But I think we are talking about the same thing. I think the key for master plans is, first of all, realizing that what they are is an effort to look at border infrastructure, first region by region, because that's what we're capable of doing at this time. I think ultimately Enrique's vision of a border-wide master plan is a very good one. I think he accepts that this is something we need to get to in stages. But it's the idea that you look at border infrastructure projects not on an ad hoc basis. Do we like this project? But in a comprehensive way. Where does this particular project fit among all those projects in a particular region, and which ones make the most sense? And as you look at it in that way, you really are planning, really are sort of generating a vision of, well, where do you think this region is going to be 20, 30 years down the line? Because if you look at the criteria for each project that these master plans take into account, they really are projecting out 25, 30 years. what would this project do for this region over that time frame? And that does require some vision as well. So, I mean, it's pragmatic in the sense that you're right. We are making a list. But these plans should ideally be living documents. In other words, you have in California already a review of the previous master plan that was done. And the idea is that each of these master plans would be periodically reviewed, updated, changed if necessary, such that they're living documents that can continue to evolve. And I think one important thing that I think we really all want to do with these master plans, especially those of us like me who are in a job and then eventually I will leave it and someone else will come in, what you want to put in place is a system, in this case a bilateral system, that people accept, that they believe actually works, and have that system in place such that it doesn't matter who is in a particular job. And it doesn't matter which administration in either country is leading the country. This process is accepted as one that's useful and productive and keeps going, such that all the hard work that people do in creating a master plan doesn't go to waste, but but moves along and informs those who follow in their footsteps, trying to achieve the same things.
Thanks, Stuart. Ralph, did you have any comments to make? Jackie, any last comments before we close up?
I think that the process will really be informed by each of the regions. Different people, different organizations, different styles will all inform the process. So I think you're right to say that there is no one template, but I also think you're right to say there should be a process. So I think proceeding, it will be easier for the certainly private sector, but more importantly, the private sector talking to the public sector about what needs to be done if there is a general process and an understanding and a commitment to move forward.
Well, my closing comment is that with NAFTA, we created a living kind of a document and a process for dealing with cargo and commerce. We fell a little short. We've never created a NAFTA to deal with people. And it's one thing we haven't learned how to do effectively, especially in post 9/11, is how to move people back and forth across the border, which is a huge component of commerce, both for the communities on the Mexican side as well as the U.S. side of the border. And it's something that as border legislators and other folks that are here that are participating and supporting, doing studies, is something that we probably need to take another look at, is how can we better address that. Maybe we need a NAFTA too that deals with people more so than with our cargo, which, as you can hear from the presenters all during this afternoon, we're giving a lot of focus and attention to, and even though there are wait times, we are constantly improving this because we have focus groups and business interests that are focused on that. So who's the champions for the people who need to go back and forth across the border? Because it's not just the infrastructure. It's not just the buildings and bricks and mortar. It's also the process. We can have all the buildings and all the lanes that we can possibly conceive of and bridges. But if we don't have a process that works in conjunction with that, we're wasting a lot of our valuable taxpayers' money on both sides of the border. And with that, I want to thank our panelists for a very fine discussion, and thank you all for your patience, and all of you have a nice afternoon.